The man from the front office knocked once on the door of room 11, then used his master key anyway, and that was how Hollis Tarrant learned his time at the Ridgeline Motor Court had run out. The door swung in on a band of gray morning light. Hollis was already sitting on the edge of the bed with his boots on, the way he had slept for most of 50 years, ready to be moved before anyone asked him to move. He did not jump. At 78, a man's heart does not jump anymore. It just leans, the way an old porch leans, and you learn to stand on it anyway. By the end of this story, I'm also going to share something special with those of you who stick around to the end, something that can help you in your personal life. But first, let's get back to Mr. Tarrant. The manager was a thin young fellow named Pell who wore a lanyard like it was a badge of office. "You're 4 days behind." I held it as long as I could. "I know it," Hollis said. "There's a fellow waiting on the room. Pays weekly, up front." Pell looked at the duffel bag on the floor, the one army green thing in a room of brown, and seemed almost sorry. Checkout was 10. Hollis looked at the clock radio. It said 10:41 in red numbers that had been wrong by 12 minutes since he checked in, which meant the real time was earlier, which meant nothing. He had stopped arguing with clocks the same year he stopped arguing with most people. "Give me till noon," he said. "I'll be gone by noon." He had a little over $40 folded in his shirt pocket and a county check that would not clear until the 1st, and the 1st was 9 days off. He had a knee that ground like a coffee mill and a cough that lived in the bottom of his chest like a tenant who would not pay and would not leave. He had a duffel, a toolbox he had carried since he was 30, a photograph he did not look at, and a name that nobody in this town had any reason to know. What he did not have, until the mail came at 11, was the first idea that he owned anything at all. The envelope came addressed in a typeface, so clean it looked machined, which it was. It had been forwarded twice, the old addresses crossed out by some clerk's pen, and it had finally caught up with him here at a motor court off the highway where men go when they have run out of better rooms. The return corner read Ozark Heritage Land Trust, and below that, in smaller letters, a postal box in Sable Hollow, Calder County, Missouri. Hollis sat back down on the bed with the boots still on and read it twice. "Dear Mr. Tarrant," the letter began, "our records indicate you are the surviving owner of approximately 160 acres in the Tarrant Hollow tract, including a residential structure now classified as derelict." It went on in that voice these things always use, the voice that calls a man's home a structure and a man's life a tract. It expressed concern for public safety. It expressed concern for the watershed. It used the word stewardship the way a hand uses a glove. And then, near the bottom, it made its offer. The Ozark Heritage Land Trust was prepared to purchase the entire parcel, take on all liability for the dangerous structure, and handle what it called the cleanup for the sum of $9,000. $9,000. Hollis read that number a third time, and something moved in him that had not moved in a long while. It was not greed. He had never had enough to be greedy with. It was closer to the feeling a man gets when a stranger calls his dead wife by the wrong name and smiles while he does it. Because the thing about being offered $9,000 for a place is that somebody, somewhere, has done the arithmetic that says the place is worth more, and they are betting that you are too tired or too poor or too far gone to ask how much more. He had not seen Tarrant Hollow since the spring of 1971. He had spent 2 of the years before that in a place where the trees were a different green, and the rain came down warm, and the only ground a man could trust was the ground he was standing on. And he had come home from that to bury his father and to learn that everything his father had said was true and that nobody who mattered would ever admit it. He had loaded a duffel then, too. He had told himself he would never go back, and for 55 years he had kept that promise the way you keep a promise to a grave, which is to say faithfully and for no reward. The cabin was still his. That was the thing the letter told him without meaning to. Through all of it, the drifting and the work and the marriage and the losing of the marriage, through Ada's long sickness and her quiet leaving, through the years he had let slide between himself and his daughter until the silence had set up like concrete, the hollow had stayed in his name. His father had seen to that. Eli Tarrant had locked that title up tight as a drum before he died, and not even the Calloways, with their bank and their lawyers and their wing on the county hospital, had ever managed to pry it loose. There was a knock again, softer. A woman this time, from the county. Her name was Donna, and she carried a clipboard the way Pell carried his lanyard, and she had been trying for 3 weeks to get Hollis to sign papers for a bed at a place called Calder Manor, which was a nursing home with a brochure that showed an old couple laughing over a checkerboard, neither of whom, Hollis suspected, had ever set foot in the building. "Mr. Tarrant, I heard you were being asked to vacate." She had a kind face and a tired one, and Hollis did not hold the clipboard against her. She was doing a hard job for not enough money, same as everybody. "I want you to know there's still a bed at the manor. They can take you today. 3 meals, your medications managed, somebody checking on you. You wouldn't have to worry about any of this." "I appreciate it," Hollis said, and he did. "But I've come into a piece of business. I'm going to go see about it." Donna looked at the envelope in his hand, and at the duffel, and at the man, and Hollis watched the arithmetic happen behind her eyes, the same arithmetic the land trust had done, only kinder. She was adding up a 78-year-old with a bad knee and a cough and $40 and a place described in a letter as a dangerous structure. And the sum she got was an old man chasing something that was not there. "What kind of business?" "I've got a piece of land back home. Family land. In Calder County." She had read enough files to know where his accent slept. "Mr. Tarrant, that's near 4 hours. In what?" "In my truck. And when you get there, is there power? Is there water? Is the roof on it?" He did not answer that, because the honest answer was that he did not know. And an old man saying he does not know is all the proof a clipboard needs. "I just don't want to see you get hurt," Donna said gently. "Sometimes the kindest thing is to make a smart decision. A safe one. You take the bed. You take the offer on the land. You let somebody else carry it for a while." It was good advice. That was the trouble with it. It was the kind of good advice that, if his father had taken it, would have ended a great many troubles and one whole family's pride in a single clean stroke. Eli Tarrant had been offered the safe and smart thing many times by men in good suits, and he had said no every time, and it had cost him his name and very likely his life. And his son had spent half a century not knowing whether the old man had been the bravest person he ever met or the most foolish. "Ma'am," Hollis said, "I had a daughter once tell me I was too stubborn to come in out of the rain. She wasn't wrong, but I'm going to go see about my land." He used the motor court's phone before he left, because his own had been shut off in April, and he called the only number he still knew by heart that belonged to family. It rang 4 times. When Della answered, her voice was guarded the way a door is guarded, open just enough to see who's there. "Dad, it's me. I wanted to tell you I'm headed back to the Hollow. To Granddad's place. I'll be out of touch a while." There was a silence on the line that he had earned, and he let it sit. "Why?" she said. "Not a question. A wall. There's a letter. Somebody wants the land. I want to see it one more time before I decide anything." "You're 78 years old," Della said, and he heard her mother in it, that flat, tired carefulness Ada used to get when she was scared and refused to show it. "You don't have a phone. You don't have any money, do you? Or you wouldn't have called collect. And now you're going to drive 4 hours into the middle of nowhere to look at a falling-down cabin that ruined this family before I was even born. Do you ever hear yourself?" "I hear myself fine. June asked about you, you know. At Christmas." His granddaughter, a girl he had never met, 13 years old now, who existed for him only as a name and a single school photograph Della had mailed once and never repeated. She asked if her grandfather was still alive. I had to tell her I wasn't sure. That one went in deep, and Hollis stood there in the motor court office holding the phone and feeling it go in, and he did not let it show in his voice, because letting things show in his voice was a habit he had lost in 1969 and never gotten back. "Tell her I'm alive," he said. "Tell her I'm going home. Dad, I love you, Della. I've made a mess of how I showed it. I know that." He cleared his throat against the tenant in his chest. "I'll call when I can." He hung up before she could answer, because there are kindnesses you do for yourself, and that was one of them, and he carried his duffel and his toolbox out to the truck. The truck was a Ford so old that the paint had gone the color of a thing left in a creek, a blue that was mostly the memory of blue. It started on the 3rd try, the way it always did, with a shudder that ran through the whole frame like a dog shaking off water. He had $11 left after he filled the tank, because gas was gas and a man cannot drive on faith, and he pointed the hood south and west toward a country he had sworn off when Nixon was president. The drive took the better part of the day. The interstate gave way to a state route, and the state route gave way to a county road that wound up into hills that got steeper and closer the deeper he went, the hardwoods crowding the shoulders, the creeks running brown and quick alongside. He had forgotten how the land here folded. Other places spread out flat and let you see your troubles coming. This country hid them in the next hollow over. He started seeing the name an hour out. A green sign for Calloway Bridge. A billboard for Calloway State Bank, serving Calder County since 1906. A turnoff for the Royce Calloway Memorial Highway. The hospital in the county seat had a Calloway wing. He remembered, paid for with a gift the local paper had called generous, and the local people had called something else, quieter, behind their hands. 55 years gone, and the name still sat on top of everything in the county like a hawk on a fence post, watching the field for movement. The Calloways had been here a long time, longer than the Tarrants, and they had learned the oldest trick there is, which is to make your name into the name of the place so that people forget there was ever a difference. He passed the closed mines on the way up. The lead and zinc had gone out of the ground here generations back, and what was left were the chap piles, those gray hills of mine waste that the rain had never quite been able to green over, and the head frames standing skeletal against the sky, and the company houses leaning in their rows. His grandfather had worked that ground. Amos Tarrant, a hard rock man who went down into the dark with a carbide lamp before there were laws to say how long he could stay or how much air he had to breathe, and who came up out of it, the family always said, with something the company never knew. He had. Hollis had grown up on that story and had never once believed it. The way you don't believe a story your father tells you about his father, until the day he was old enough to see that his father believed it absolutely, and then it was too late to ask the right questions. The light was failing when he found the turn. Ledford Creek Road, gravel, and then a smaller track off of that with no sign at all. Just two ruts running up into the trees with a green strip of grass growing between them. And he knew it the way you know a face you have not seen since childhood, not by any single feature, but all at once, in the body, before the mind can catch up. Tarrant Hollow. The truck climbed it in second gear, branches dragging along the doors with a sound like fingernails, the creek talking somewhere off to the left, and then the trees opened, and there it was. The cabin stood at the head of the hollow where it had always stood, where his great-grandfather had set the first logs, and his grandfather had raised the walls, and his father had lived out his hard, short life and died. Tom had been at it the way time is at everything. The porch roof sagged on one end where a post had rotted out from under it. The chimney had lost stones from its crown. The windows were dark and some were broken, and a young sweet gum had come up through the floor of the lean-to on the north side and was growing through the place where the woodpile used to be. The whole thing had settled into the hillside the way an old animal settles, not dead, but lying down. And yet it stood. That was the thing that got him, sitting there in the idling truck with the headlights washing over it. 55 years of nobody, of winters and summers and nobody, and the main structure stood square. He had spent his working life as a carpenter, framing houses and fixing them, and he had learned to read a building the way a doctor reads a body. And as I told him before his heart could argue that the bones of this place were good, hand-hewn sills of white oak that would outlast the men who cut them, a roofline that had a sag, but not a break. Somebody, his grandfather most likely, had built it to stand, and it was standing, and Hollis Tarrant sat in his truck and felt something come up in his throat that he had not let up in years. He cut the engine. The hollow went quiet, that deep mountain quiet that is not silence at all, but 100 small sounds your ears have to relearn, the creak and the wind in the high branches and a whippoorwill starting up somewhere down the draw. He got out slow, on the bad knee, holding the door. And that was when he noticed the first thing that was wrong, or not wrong, but strange, because a place abandoned for 55 years should not have a path. There was a path, a narrow one, worn through the grass from the edge of the clearing to the porch steps, and the steps themselves had been swept. He could see it now in the last light, swept clear of the leaf litter that should have buried them. The brush that should have swallowed the whole yard had been cut back, not lately, but not 55 years ago either. Cut back by somebody over years, the way you keep after a thing you mean to keep. Somebody had been here. Somebody had been keeping after this place. And Hollis stood in the yard of his dead father's house with his hand still on the truck door and felt the hair come up on his arms. "You'll be the Tarrant boy." He turned. The voice had come from the edge of the trees, and out of the dusk there came first a boy, maybe 10 or 11, barefoot and quick, with a fishing pole in one hand and a string of bluegill in the other, who stopped dead at the sight of a stranger and stood his ground the way mountain children do, neither bold nor afraid. And behind the boy, Coming slower with a flashlight not yet switched on and a walking stick that was really just a cut sapling, came an old woman. She was near his own age, he guessed, or older, small and bent and dressed in a man's flannel coat that hung off her like a coat off a chair, and she came across the yard with the unhurried certainty of somebody walking on her own ground, which, Hollis would learn, was exactly how she felt about it. She stopped a few feet off and looked up at him, and her eyes in the flashlight glow when she finally clicked it on were sharp as a wren's. "Lord have mercy," she said. "You've got Eli's jaw. You've got his very jaw." And to Hollis's complete astonishment, her chin began to tremble, and she pressed the back of her free hand to her mouth, and the boy looked from her to the stranger with alarm. I told Eli you'd come. 50 years I've been telling a dead man you'd come home, and here you are, and you've got his jaw." "Ma'am," Hollis said, "I don't believe I know you. You wouldn't. You were a boy when you left, and I was already a married woman, and you never had cause to look twice at me." She lowered the hand. She gathered herself, the way the old gather themselves, with effort and dignity. "Ruth Embry. My husband was Carl Embry. I expect you don't remember him either, but he remembered you, and he remembered your daddy, and he carried it to his grave like a stone in his boot." She looked past Hollis at the dark cabin, and her voice changed, got lower, got careful. "This here is my great-grandson, Asa. He keeps me company. We come up most evenings to fish the pool below the spring, and to look in on the place." She met Hollis's eyes again. "I've been looking in on this place for a long time, Mr. Tarrant. Your daddy asked me to. Just about the last thing he ever said to a living soul, he said it to me." The boy Asa had crept closer, his curiosity overcoming his caution, and he was staring at Hollis with the frank, open interest of a child who has just discovered that a story he half believed is standing in front of him. "You're really him?" Asa said. "The one that's supposed to come back?" "Hush," Ruth said, but not unkindly. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be," Hollis said honestly. "I got a letter. Somebody wants to buy the land. I came to look at it before I decide." At the word letter, Ruth Embry's whole body changed. She stiffened. Her grip tightened on the sapling stick. "A letter," she said. "From who? From what?" "Land trust. Ozark something. Heritage." The old woman made a sound in her throat that was half a laugh and half a curse, a sound Hollis had not heard since his own grandmother made it over men she despised. "Heritage," she said. "Ozark Heritage Land Trust. That's a Calloway, Mr. Tarrant. That's a Calloway in a clean shirt. They run it through 3 or 4 other names, so it don't say Calloway on the paper, but you follow the money up the creek far enough, and you come to Bennett Calloway sitting in old Royce's chair, in old Royce's house, with old Royce's appetite." She shook her head. 50 years, and they're still at it. Still circling this hollow like buzzards over a thing that won't quite die. She looked at him hard. "How much did they offer you?" 9,000. She laughed outright then, a short bitter bark, and it set the boy to nervous laughing too, though he plainly did not understand it. $9,000, Ruth Embry said. "For Tarrant Hollow. Lord, they must think you're stupid, or they think you're poor, which to a Calloway is the same thing." She came a step closer and lowered her voice as if the trees might carry it. "Mr. Tarrant, your daddy died trying to get somebody to believe what's true about this hollow, and there wasn't a man in Calder County brave enough or fool enough to stand with him, my Carl least of all, and Carl knew. Carl knew and stayed quiet for his pension and a pat on the head from Royce Calloway, and it ate the man hollow before the cancer ever did." Her eyes were wet again, but her voice was steady now, hard and steady. "I'm an old woman, and I've got nothing left to lose and nobody left to protect but this boy, and I am telling you, they do not want this land for $9,000. They have never wanted it for $9,000. They want what's under it. And your daddy made sure they couldn't get it, and then he made sure I'd be here to tell you so." Hollis stood very still. The whippoorwill called and called down the draw. The cabin loomed dark behind them, his father's house, his grandfather's house, full of 55 years of nobody. "Mrs. Embry," he said slowly, "what's under it?" "I don't rightly know all of it," Ruth said. "Eli never told me the all of it. He wasn't a man to put a weight on somebody he didn't have to. But I know there's a cellar, a stone cellar, dug back in the hill behind the house, that your granddaddy Amos built with his own hands and your daddy sealed up tight before he passed. I know your daddy welded the door and laid stone over the weld, and I held the lantern while he did the last of it, And I know that the night he finished he sat right there on those steps, and he cried, which I never saw that man do before or since. She paused. And I know he gave me something to keep for you, for the day you came home. I've kept it in my Bible 50 years, Mr. Tarrant, and waited, and most days I figured I'd die with it still tucked in Matthew, and the secret would go in the ground with the both of us. She reached into the deep pocket of the man's flannel coat. But here you are, with his jaw. What she brought out was a key, and a folded square of paper gone soft and brown as a dead leaf at the creases. The key was old and heavy, a long iron thing with a bow worn smooth by some hand that was not Hollis's, and a bit cut in a pattern he did not recognize. It was not a key for any lock he had ever framed a door around. It was older than that, stranger than that, a key made for a lock somebody had also made by hand, the way you make a thing when you do not want any locksmith in town to have a record of the shape of it. The paper, when Hollis unfolded it by the light of Ruth Embry's flashlight, with the boy crowding in close to see and the old woman watching his face instead of the page, was in his father's hand. He would have known it anywhere. Eli Tarrant had written the way he did everything, plain and hard, and pressing down too firm on the pencil, and the years had faded the lead to silver, but the words were there. Son, if you are reading this, then you came home after all, and I am glad of it, even where I am. The cellar door does not open the way a door opens. Amos built it to fool a thief, and it has fooled them for 60 years. Do not bring the law. Do not bring a Calloway. Do not trust a man who offers you money for this hollow, because the more they offer, the more they know. What is down there is yours by blood and by right, and they have lied and killed to keep you from it. The key is only half of it. Ruth will not know the rest, and that is for her own safety. You will know the rest when you look with your granddaddy's eyes and not your own. Forgive me for the name I left you. Make it right. Your father, Eli Tarrant. Hollis read it through twice. The hollow was full dark now. Somewhere up the slope an owl had taken over from the whippoorwill, and the creek ran on, the way it had run when Amos Tarrant first set the logs, the way it had run when Eli sat on the cellar steps and wept over what he was sealing into the hill. He always said you'd know, Ruth murmured. He said, my Hollis will know how to look. That boy can see how a thing is put together. He could always see how a thing was put together. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Was he right? Hollis folded the paper along its soft old creases and put it in his shirt pocket with his $11. And he closed his hand around the iron key until the worn teeth of it pressed into his palm. And he looked at the dark shape of the cabin and behind it, where the ground rose into the wooded hill, the place where a stone cellar must be waiting, sealed and patient, 60 years and more. I don't know yet, he said, but I aim to find out. He did not find out that night. There was the truck to deal with, and the duffel, and the matter of where a 78-year-old man with a bad knee was going to sleep, and Ruth Embry would not hear of him staying in the cabin until he had looked at the floors by daylight and was sure of them, which was a carpenter's caution and pleased him to hear from an old woman. She made him follow them down the hollow to her place, a snug small house with a tin roof and a porch light, and the smell of fried bluegill already starting, and she fed him until he could not hold any more. And the boy Asa peppered him with questions about the war and the cabin and the key until Ruth shooed him off to bed. And it was over the last of the coffee, with the dishes done and the boy asleep, that Ruth Embry told him the first piece of what the Calloways had done, sitting at her kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a chipped cup, in the slow, careful way the old tell a thing they have carried too long. Your daddy and Royce Calloway were not always enemies, she said. That's the part folks forget, the young ones that even remember any of it. There was a time, back when you were small, that Royce and Eli would stand and talk at the feed store like men do. The Calloways had the bank and the timber, and they'd bought up most of the mineral down the valley, all the old lead ground. And they were land poor and money rich the way those families get. And Royce, he got it in his head, somewhere in there, that there was something in this hollow. I don't know how he come by it. Maybe an old assay. Maybe just the old story about your granddaddy Amos coming up out of the mine with something the company never knew about. Royce Calloway was a man who could not stand to think that anybody, anywhere, had a thing he didn't, especially a poor man, especially a Tarrant. She turned the cup in her hands. He came at Eli nice, first. Offered to buy? Good money, even. Your daddy said no. This is family ground, and that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't the end of it, because it was never about the money for Royce, same as it ain't about the money for Bennett now. Royce wanted in. And when Eli wouldn't sell, Royce started in with the other ways. There was a lien showed up on the hollow that did not to have been there, out of the courthouse, with Eli's name signed to a note he never signed. There was a survey come along and decided the property line ran 100 feet different than it had run for 90 years, and wouldn't you know it, the 100 feet it moved put the spring and the cellar mouth on the wrong side. There was a man from the state, a mining man, came nosing up here with a clipboard, and your daddy run him off the porch with a shotgun. And 2 weeks later there was a story in the county paper about Eli Tarrant being a danger to himself and others, an unstable man, a man who saw conspiracies, and the man who owned that paper, Mr. Tarrant, banked at Calloway State and golfed with Royce Calloway every Sunday God sent. Hollis sat with his coffee going cold and listened to a thing he had half known his whole life, finally said out loud by somebody who had been there. "They made my daddy out to be crazy," he said. "They made your daddy out to be crazy," Ruth agreed. "Because a crazy man's land is easy to take when he's gone, and a crazy man's word is worth nothing while he's living, and a crazy man, if something was to happen to him, well." She did not finish that. She did not have to. Your daddy spent the last 3 years of his life trying to get one single soul in authority to come up this hollow, and look at what Royce Calloway was really after. The county wouldn't. The state wouldn't. He wrote to the Capitol and got back a form letter. He wrote to a newspaper in St. Louis and never heard a word. And the whole time, Royce's men were on this ground at night. Eli would find their sign in the morning. Boot tracks. A gate left open. Once a hole somebody'd started digging behind the spring house and quit when the ground turned to rock. They were hunting it, Mr. Tarrant. They knew it was here and they could not find it, because your granddaddy Amos was a smarter man than any Calloway ever born, and your daddy was smarter still, and the two of them between them built a thing that has kept a secret for 60 years. "And then he died," Hollis said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "And then he died," she said. "The spring of 1971. They said he fell off the bluff above the spring, where the path runs narrow. They said an old man lost his footing in the dark and went over, and the coroner, who I will tell you also banked at Calloway State, wrote it down as an accident, and that was that." She looked Hollis dead in the eye. "Your daddy walked that path in the pitch dark 50,000 times. He could have walked it blind. He could have walked it drunk, and Eli never touched a drop. I do not believe he fell, Mr. Tarrant. I have not believed it for 55 years. But there was no one to say so, and I was a coward married to a coward, and you were across the world being shot at, and so nobody said so. He went in the ground at the Sable Hollow Church with maybe 9 people standing over him, and most of them were there to make sure he was really dead. The kitchen was warm, and the night outside was full of the creek and the owl and the great dark weight of the hills, and Hollis Tarrant sat at a stranger's table and felt 55 years of running fold up under him like a tired horse. "Why'd he leave it to me?" he said, half to himself. "If it was so dangerous, why not let it go in the ground with him and keep me out of it? I'd have never known. I'd have lived my whole life and never known." "Because he didn't want you to be safe," Ruth said. "He wanted you to be right. There's a difference, and your daddy knew it, and I expect you know it. Or you'd have signed those nursing home papers and took the $9,000 like the county lady wanted." She reached across the table, and her old hand was light and dry as a leaf on the back of his. "He left it to you because somebody had to make it right, and he ran out of time. That's all any of us is, at the end. Somebody who ran out of time, hoping there's a body coming up the road behind us to finish it." Hollis turned the iron key over in his free hand. The bow of it caught the kitchen light. "You said Bennett Calloway's in the old man's chair now. In every way there is." Ruth withdrew her hand and sat back. "Bennett's the grandson. Royce's boy died young, so it skipped a generation and landed on Bennett. And folks will tell you Bennett's nothing like his granddaddy, that he gives to the schools and puts up the welcome signs and runs the land trust to save the pretty places, and it's all true, and it's all paint. The boy went off to college and learned to do it polite. He learned to call it heritage and conservation and watershed instead of just sending men up a hollow at night. But it's the same hunger, Mr. Tarrant. He's wanted this place his whole life because his granddaddy wanted it and never got it, and a Calloway cannot abide a thing his family was denied." She nodded at the window, at the dark. "You watch. You've been in this county not 8 hours. You watch how long it takes them to come up that road now that a Tarrant's home." Before we find out what happened next in the story, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to anyone watching who might be going through their own sudden, overwhelming transition. If you are navigating a bitter divorce, the loss of a spouse, or a financial shock, you know the hardest part isn't just the money. It's not knowing what to do first. That is exactly why we created the Phoenix Blueprint. It is a practical, step-by-step guide for starting over. It doesn't have fluffy affirmations or vision boards. It is a tactical survival manual. It gives you the exact checklist for the first 48 hours, including the one rule you must follow. Do not make any decision you cannot reverse. It includes the Found Money worksheet, showing you exactly how to check state databases because 1 in 7 Americans actually has unclaimed money waiting for them right now. It even gives you word-for-word boundary scripts to use when family members pressure you for money or try to make decisions for you. You can get the entire guide right now for just $17. If you're watching on your TV, just pull out your phone, open your camera, and scan the QR code on the screen right now. If you're on a computer or phone, click the top link in the description. You don't have to figure this out alone. Now, let's get back to the story. It took less time than she thought. Hollis slept that night on Ruth Embry's couch under a quilt her mother had pieced, and he slept hard for the first time in a long while. The sleep of a man who has finally stopped moving away from something and started moving toward it. He woke before light out of old habit, made the coffee himself, and was sitting on Ruth's porch step watching the hollow go from black to gray to green when he heard the engine on the gravel below. It was not Ruth's old car, and it was not the rattling thing the boy's father drove. It came up Ledford Creek Road smooth and quiet and expensive, and it turned up the Tarrant Hollow track, and Hollis stood up off the step and watched a black SUV the size of a small boat climb the ruts his old Ford had climbed the night before and stop in the yard of his cabin as if it had every right. A man got out. He was maybe 45, fit, in a vest and good boots that had never seen mud, with sunglasses pushed up on his head and a leather folder under his arm. And he had the smile already on. Hollis could see it from down the hollow, the smile that goes on before the man knows who he's smiling at. Hollis came up the path slow, on the knee, and the man turned and saw him, and the smile widened. "Mr. Tarrant." The man came toward him with his hand out. "I sure hoped I'd catch you. Word travels fast in a small county. I'm with the Ozark Heritage Land Trust. Name's Doyle." The hand was dry and the grip was firm and practiced. "I drove out the second I heard you'd come back to look at the property. I wanted to introduce myself in person. Letters are so cold, don't you think?" "You drove out at 6 in the morning," Hollis said. Doyle laughed easily. "Early bird. I know the cabin's a sentimental thing for you, and I respect that. I truly do. My own people are from up around here, way back." He turned and looked at the sagging porch, the broken windows, the sweet gum growing through the lean-to, and he shook his head with a sorrow that was very good, very nearly real. "But Mr. Tarrant, I have to be straight with you, because I think you're a man who appreciates straight. This structure is dangerous. The county's got it flagged. One of these winters that roof comes down, and if anybody's inside, or anybody's kids are playing in here, that's on the owner. That's a liability you do not want at your stage of life." "My stage of life," Hollis said. "I only mean," Doyle said smoothly, "that you've got better things to spend your days on than worrying about a derelict building 4 hours from wherever you've been making your home. Let us take it. Let us handle the cleanup, the liability, all of it. And Mr. Tarrant, between us, I've got some room to move on that number in the letter. I came out here authorized to go to 15,000. Cash, fast close, no realtors, no hassle. $15,000 in your pocket by the end of the month." The number had jumped $6,000 overnight. Hollis stood in the yard of his father's house with his father's key in his pocket and the letter in his shirt and Ruth Embry's voice in his ear. The more they offer, the more they know. And he understood that he was being shown, right now, in this smiling man's raised offer, exactly how much the Calloways still feared this hollow. "I had a fella tell me once," Hollis said, "that the more a man offers you for a thing, the more he knows it's worth. You just offered me $6,000 more than you offered me yesterday, Mr. Doyle, and you don't know one thing about this place you didn't know yesterday. So either you're a poor businessman, which I doubt, or you're afraid of something." The smile held, but something cooled behind it, just for a second, the way a cloud crosses a field. "I think you've been talking to old Ruth Embry," Doyle said, pleasantly. She's a character, isn't she? Bless her heart. She's got stories about my organization that would curl your hair. None of them true, of course, but she does tell them well. He let that sit, and then he reached into the leather folder and came out with a card and held it between two fingers. I'll leave you my number. You think it over. But Mr. Tarrant, do think it over soon. The county's patience with that structure isn't infinite, and once they condemn it for real, the math changes for everybody. A condemned building's a cost, not an asset. I'd hate to see you end up paying to tear down a thing I'm offering to buy. He smiled once more, and this time Hollis saw it for exactly what it was. How's your daughter, by the way? Della, isn't it? And the granddaughter? June. Family's everything, Mr. Tarrant. You want to be in a position to take care of them, not leave them a pile of legal trouble 4 hours away. He put the card in Hollis's hand, the way Hollis would. Learn these men always did, never asking, just placing the thing on you like a hand on your shoulder, and he got back into the black SUV and backed it down the ruts, and was gone, the engine fading down Ledford Creek Road, until there was only the creek again and the morning birds. Hollis stood a long while in the yard. He looked at the card, which said Doyle and a phone number and nothing else, no last name, no title, no address, the card of a man who did not want to be found, only to find. He thought about how Doyle had known Della's name, and June's, a girl Hollis himself had never laid eyes on. He thought about a man named Royce Calloway sending other men up this hollow in the dark 60 years ago, hunting for a thing they could not find, and a man named Eli Tarrant going over a bluff he could have walked blind. He thought about 55 years of being away, of telling himself the old man was a fool, of half believing the county's version because it was easier than carrying his father's. Then he turned and looked at the cabin, and past it, at the wooded rise of the hill where a stone cellar his grandfather built waited behind a door that did not open the way a door opens. He put Doyle's card in his pocket next to his father's letter, where the two of them could keep each other company, and he started up toward the house to look at the floors by daylight, and to find, with his grandfather's eyes and not his own, the rest of the way in. By full daylight the cabin gave up its secrets the way a tired man gives up an argument, slowly and then all at once. Hollis went over it the way he had gone over 1,000 houses in his working life, on his knees with the toolbox open beside him, pressing his thumb into the sills, sounding the floor joists with the handle of a hammer, reading the long settle of the place in the slope of the boards. The floor of the front room dipped toward the center where a pier had shifted in the clay, but the underlying timbers were oak heart and sound, the kind of wood you could not buy anymore at any price. And Hollis put his hand flat on a sill that his great-grandfather had squared with a broadaxe and felt across more than a century the work of a man who had built to last past his own remembering. He patched what could be patched in a morning. He pulled the rotted post out from under the porch roof and set a cut locust trunk in its place, persimmon hard and good for 50 years, and the roof came up off its sag with a groan that sounded almost grateful. He nailed a sheet of tin Ruth's grandson hauled up over the worst hole in the roof. He cleared the stovepipe and built a small fire in the old iron range to drive the damp out, and the cabin filled with the smell of wood smoke and the particular mustiness of a place coming awake after a long sleep. Ruth Embry came up the hollow at mid-morning with a basket and the boy Asa carrying a second one, and she set out cornbread and a jar of beans she had put up and a thermos of coffee, and she stood in the doorway looking at the smoke coming out of Eli Tarrant's chimney for the first time in 55 years, and she had to go back outside for a minute. He'd not believe it, she said when she came back, dry-eyed and ornery again. Eli Tarrant's boy fixing the porch. He'd say it was about time, and then he'd find something wrong with how you'd done it. But she said it soft. Hollis straightened up off the bad knee and looked around at the room. He thought about Donna and her clipboard and the bed at Calder Manor with the brochure of strangers laughing over a checkerboard. He thought about Della on the phone. You don't have any money, do you? He thought about $9,000, then 15, and a smiling man named Doyle who knew his granddaughter's name. And he made up his mind, the way he made up most of his minds, quiet and final and without any speech about it. I'm not selling this place, he said. Whatever's in it. Whatever it costs. I'm done running off from it. Good, Ruth said. You ought to know that could cost you something too. You and the boy. If I'm right about these people. Mr. Tarrant, Ruth said, I have been afraid of the Calloways for 55 years, and being afraid of them did not save my husband one single day of grief. and it did not save your daddy at all. I am 79 years old, and I have decided I would rather be useful than safe. So you tell me what you need, and I'll fetch it, and Asa here will fetch what I'm too slow for." The boy stood up straighter when she said his name. "And we will find out together what your granddaddy hid in this hill, and what your daddy died over, and then by God we will figure out what to do about it." So they went up the hill. The cellar was not under the house. That was the first thing, and it surprised Hollis until he thought about it the way a builder thinks, and then it made perfect sense. Amos Tarrant had not dug his cellar in the ground beneath his family, where any settling or fire or flood would find it, and where any man who burned the house could pick through the ashes. He had set it back into the hillside behind the cabin, into the living rock of the slope, the way a hard rock miner sets things into rock, because rock is the only thing such a man fully trusts. There was a path up to it, grown over but findable, and at the end of the path a stone retaining wall built into the hill, mossed and weathered, and in the middle of the wall a door. Hollis stood in front of it a long while. It was an iron door, set in a frame of dressed limestone, and across the whole face of it his father had laid up a course of mortared stone, sealing it the way you seal a tomb. The mortar had gone gray and hard as the rock around it, and low on the right-hand stone, where a man kneeling would set his hand, somebody had scratched 2 letters and a year into the wet mortar before it set, 60 years ago, with a nail or a knife point. E.T. And under it, 1970, the last year of his father's life. "This is where I held the lantern," Ruth said quietly behind him. "Right where you're standing." He worked till near midnight, mixing the mortar in a bucket by the light, laying the stone up over the iron, and he didn't say but maybe 10 words the whole time. And when it was done he sat down on the path with his back against this wall, and he put his face in his hands. She was quiet. I never asked him what was behind it. I figured a man's got a right to his own grief and his own secrets. I just held the lantern. That was all he wanted of me. Somebody to hold the lantern while he buried it. Hollis knelt down, slow, on the path his father had sat on, and put 2 fingers on the scratched letters, E.T., the way he had put his fingers on the letters of the headstone he never visited, and for a moment he could not speak either. Then he stood up and got his cold chisel and a 4-pound hand sledge out of the toolbox, and he went to work, because that was the only prayer he knew how to say. It took him the rest of the day to take down his father's seal. Eli had laid it up to last, and it lasted, and Hollis chipped the old mortar joint by joint, careful as a man defusing something, sweat running into the creases of his face, the boy carrying away the loosened stones and stacking them neat to one side, because Ruth told him a Tarrant did not leave a mess on a Tarrant's mountain. The light was going gold and long through the trees by the time the last of the mortared course came away and the iron door stood bare in its limestone frame. And there in the center of it, where the mortar had hidden it for 60 years, was a keyhole shaped for the iron key in Hollis's pocket. His hands were not steady when he took the key out. Ruth had brought a real lantern this time, a battery one, and she held it the way she had held the old one, and Asa stood between them holding his breath, and Hollis fit the worn iron key into the lock his grandfather had made and his father had hidden, and he turned it. It turned hard, 60 years of stillness in it, and then something deep in the iron gave, a heavy, reluctant clunk, and the door came off its seat half an inch with a breath of cool air that smelled of stone and earth and time. Hollis got his fingers in the gap and pulled, and the iron door swung out on hinges his father must have greased before he sealed it, swung out smooth and silent, and the lantern light fell into the room beyond. And it was empty, not entirely empty. It was a cellar, a real one, a stone room maybe 8 feet deep and 6 wide, with shelves of rough-sawn plank along both walls. But the shelves held only a few things. Some old canning jars, the contents long gone black, a rusted lard tin, a coil of rotted rope, a broken crock. The dirt floor was bare. There was nothing here. There was nothing here at all, and Hollis stood in the doorway with the key still warm from the turning in his hand and felt the bottom go out of something. Asa said it before either grown person could. "There's nothing in it." His voice was small with disappointment. "It's just an old cellar." Ruth made a low sound. 50 years, she said. 50 years I kept that key in my Bible for an empty cellar. But Hollis was not listening to her, because the disappointment had lasted only as long as it took the carpenter in him to come back awake, and the carpenter in him was looking at the back wall. "No," he said slowly. "No. That's wrong. He stepped into the room, ducking under the low stone lintel, and he put his hand flat against the back wall and then walked his fingers along it. And then he turned around and looked back at the door, and he stood there doing arithmetic in his head, the kind of arithmetic a man does without meaning to after 50 years of building. What's wrong? Ruth said. This room's too short. Hollis rapped the back wall with his knuckle, then with the chisel handle, and where the side walls gave the dull, dead sound of stone against solid hill, the back wall, in its lower courses, gave back something else. Not hollow exactly, but not solid hill either. I came up this path. I know about how far back into this hill we walked, and I know how deep this room is, because I'm standing in it. And there's near 6 feet of hill between the back of this room and where the slope falls off on the far side. And that 6 feet ought to be solid rock. He looked at the wall. My daddy's note. The cellar door does not open the way a door opens. He didn't mean this door. This door opens just fine. He meant there's another one. He laid his palm against the dressed stone of the back wall, and his voice changed, got quiet with something that was almost wonder. Look at the work. Asa, bring that light close. You see how these stones are set? Up there, the side walls. That's a mason's work. That's my great-granddaddy laying up a cellar wall. But down here, he traced the lower courses. These stones are dressed, cut square and tight, faces worked smooth. A farmer building a root cellar doesn't dress his stone like that. That's not mason's work, son. That's mining work. That's a man squaring a face the way you square a face when you're following rock, when you're drifting along a seam. My daddy said it. Look with your granddaddy's eyes. Amos was a hard rock man. He didn't build a cellar. He drove a working into this hill and made it look like a cellar, and the cellar's the lie, and the lie's been keeping the truth for 60 years. He went over every inch of that back wall in the lantern light, while Ruth held the lantern and the boy held the breath. And it was the boy, in the end, who found the thing Hollis was looking for, the way it had been a child who found the marble gap and the wallpaper seam in the old stories Ruth could not have known to tell him. Asa, crouched down small where the back wall met the floor, said, "There's air coming out down here," and put his hand to a joint near the floor where the lantern flame leaned, just barely, toward the stone. Hollis got down on the bad knee beside him. There was a draft, faint and cool and steady, coming from a joint in the lowest course, and where Hollis worked his fingers into it he found that the joint was not mortared like the others, but only packed with dirt, and under the dirt the stone moved. Just slightly. It rocked. It set on a pivot, he breathed. The whole bottom course. Or part of it. Amos hung a stone door and made it look like a wall, and he weighted it so it sits closed, and there's a thing somewhere that frees it. He looked up at the iron door behind them, at the keyhole. The key is only half of it. He said the key is only half of it. And then Hollis Tarrant understood, the way you understand the last word of a puzzle, all at once, and with a kind of laugh in it, what his father and his grandfather had built. The iron key opened the outer door, the door to the empty cellar, the door to the lie, and any thief who broke through Eli's seal and turned that lock would find an empty room and go away believing the story that there was nothing here. But the other door, the real door, the pivoting stone, did not take the key at all. It took knowing. It took a man who could read a worked stone face and feel a draft and think like the miner who cut it. The key let you into the empty room, so you would give up. The knowing let you pass the empty room to the truth. Amos had built a lock that only family could open, because family was the only ones who would know to keep looking after they thought they had found nothing. It took Hollis and the boy near an hour to work out the trip. There was a stone in the side wall, an ordinary-looking stone at shoulder height, that proved to be loose, and behind it a recess. And in the recess an iron lever gone stiff with rust that Hollis worked back and forth, careful not to break it, until it freed. And when it freed, and Hollis put his shoulder against the dressed lower courses of the back wall and pushed, the whole bottom of the wall pivoted inward, silent on a balance Amos Tarrant had reckoned 60 years before with nothing but a hard rock miner's hands and eye, and revealed a black opening into the hill, and a flight of stone steps going down. Cold air came up out of it, dry and old, the air of a place sealed away from the world for a lifetime. "Lord in heaven," Ruth, Embry whispered. "Stay here," Hollis said, to her and to the boy both. But Ruth handed him the lantern and said, "I held the lantern when he closed it. I'll be the one holds it when you open it." And there was no arguing with her. So the three of them went down together, the old man, the older woman, and the boy, into the dark of the hill. The steps were cut from the rock, and they went down farther than Hollis expected, 20 steps, 25. The walls close and worked smooth, the marks of the single jack and drill steel still on them, where Amos had broken the rock by hand 100 years ago. And then the steps ended, and the lantern light opened out, and they were standing in a chamber. It was a room carved from the bedrock of the mountain, 10 feet by maybe 15, the ceiling low enough that Hollis could have touched it, the walls dry and close and silent. Amos had not just dug it. He had finished it, smoothed the floor, squared the corners, the patient work of a man with all the dark nights of a long life to fill. There was a wooden bench along one wall, and a table, and shelves, all built of the same hard oak as the cabin, dovetailed and pegged, and standing as true as the day they were set, because no weather and no thief and no Calloway had ever touched them. And on the shelves, and on the table, and in the stout iron-strapped chests ranged along the back wall, was the work of 3 generations of one stubborn family hiding what was theirs from the men who meant to take it. Hollis did not understand what he was looking at first. The mind does not let you understand a thing that large all at once. He saw, on the nearest shelf, rows of small canvas sacks, gray with age, tied at the neck with twine, and he picked one up, and it was heavy, far heavier than its size, the dense, unmistakable heaviness that a man's hand knows before his head does. And he worked the rotten twine loose and poured a little of it into his palm in the lantern light, and it was gold. Coins. Gold coins, dozens to the sack, and there were sacks and sacks of them, going back into the dark of the shelf, double eagles and half eagles, the dates running back into the 1800s, the gold catching the lantern and throwing it back warm into the carved stone room. On the table were the bars. Hollis had never in his life seen a bar of gold, and he stood looking at them, not quite able to make his eyes agree with each other. They were stacked like firewood, some of them rough cast and stamped only with a weight and a fineness in a hand-struck die. The gold Amos had retorted and poured himself in some hidden forge, and others sleeker, commercial bars, the kind a man buys when he has cash he does not trust a bank to keep. There were dozens of them. Hollis lifted one, and it was the weight of a thing that did not want to be lifted, and he set it down again with both hands because his arms would not do it with one. The chests, when he opened them, held more. More gold, raw and in jars, the dust and the small rough buttons of a mine worked in secret. And paper. Bundles of paper banded in old wrappers. And Hollis at first thought it was money, and then saw that some of it was bonds, the long ornate certificates of another age, bearer bonds with the coupons still attached, and he could not begin to read what they were worth, and did not try. And there were coins that were kept apart from the rest. That was the thing Hollis came back to later, the thing that told him that whoever had built this room had understood, at least in part, what some of it was. In a separate small chest, lined with felt gone to powder, individual coins were each wrapped in a square of soft leather and laid in rows, the way you lay away a thing you know to be precious beyond the others. And Hollis lifted one and unwrapped it and held in his fingers a single gold coin, old, worn soft at the high points, and he had no idea on this earth that he was holding more money than he had earned in 78 years of living. But he knew, the way you know in a church, that he was holding something that mattered. Nobody spoke for a long time. The lantern hissed. The boy stood with his mouth open and his eyes huge. Ruth Embry had both hands pressed to her chest and tears running down the deep lines of her face, and she was saying something under her breath that Hollis realized after a while was the only thing there was to say, which was thank you, over and over, though to whom she was saying it she likely could not have told you. The dead man who built the room, or the dead man who sealed it, or the god of an old woman who had held the lantern twice in one long life. Hollis sat down on his grandfather's oak bench because his knee would not hold him, and neither would the rest of him. He looked at the gold catching the light, at 3 generations of his blood made solid and hidden in the heart of the mountain his family had held against all comers, and the thing that came up in him was not joy, not yet, not the way you would think. It was grief. It came up in a wave and bent him over, and he sat on the bench in the gold-lit dark with his face in his hands the way his father had sat on the path above, and he wept. He wept for Eli, who had died called crazy by men who knew better, guarding this alone. He wept for Amos, whom he had never known, breaking this rock by hand in the dark, year after year, telling no one. He wept for the 55 years he had spent away believing the easy lie, calling his own father a fool in the privacy of his heart because the county had told him to. And he wept, last and worst, for Della and for a granddaughter named June he had never seen, because all those years he had had nothing to give them, had been ashamed to have nothing, and the whole time it had been here, in the dark, waiting for somebody to come home and look with the right eyes. Ruth let him weep. She knew when to hold a lantern and not say anything. That was her gift, and she had given it to 2 generations of Tarrant men now. When he was done, he wiped his face with the heel of his hand, and he found, set apart on the table, weighted down by a small gold bar, as if against a wind that would never blow in that sealed place, 2 letters. One was thick and one was thin, and both had his name on them in 2 different hands, and Hollis knew the one hand for his father's and guessed the other, rightly, for a grandfather dead before he was born. He read Amos's first, because it was on top, and because Eli had clearly meant it that way. Amos Tarrant's letter was written in the careful copperplate of a man who had taught himself to write at night by a mine lamp, and it was dated 1931, and it told, in the plain hard words of a plain hard man, where it all came from. Amos had gone down into the company's ground as a boy and a young man, and he had seen how it was. He had seen the short waits at the company scale and the script that was only good at the company store and the men sent into bad air to save the cost of a fan and brought up dead. And he had seen what happened to any man who found color on his own claim, how the company's lawyers and the company's assayers and the company's friends at the bank, which was the Calloway bank even then, would take it from him through the courts so smooth he never knew he was robbed until he was poor. So when Amos, working a little claim of his own on the family ground in the hollow, on his own time, with his own hands, struck a pocket of high grade richer than anything he had ever seen, he told no one. Not the company, not the bank, not even his wife, until the end. He worked it out by night over 11 years, milled it and retorted it himself in a forge he built back in the hill, and every ounce he won he hid, because he had learned in his bones that the only wealth a poor man gets to keep is the wealth no rich man knows about. I am no thief, Amos wrote. This was mine, dug by me, off my own ground, and I have hid it from thieves, which is a different thing, though I expect the thieves would not agree. I leave it to my blood. Use it better than I had the chance to. And do not ever, ever sell this hollow to a Calloway, for they are the same men that robbed my friends, and they will rob my children if you give them the door. Eli's letter was longer and harder to read, because Eli's hand shook in places and stopped in others, and because Eli had written it knowing he was being hunted in the last year of his life. It told the rest. How Royce Calloway had come around, friendly first, then not. How the forged lien had appeared, and the moved survey line, and the man from the state with his clipboard, and the story in the paper that made Eli out to be mad. How Eli had spent 3 years writing letters that no one answered, trying to get one honest soul in authority to come and see, because Eli had understood that the gold, by itself, was only money, but the gold together with what Royce Calloway was willing to do to get it was something else, was proof, was a rope you could hang the truth on. They will say I stole it or dreamed it, or that there is nothing here, and I am crazy, Eli wrote. They have already started saying it. So I am giving you not just the gold but the showing of it, the lien they forged with my name, the survey they faked, the letter from Royce's own man that I got hold of, all of it is in the gray box on the end shelf. The gold makes you rich, son. The box makes you right. I could not get a single man to stand with me. Maybe you will have better luck, or maybe the world will have grown an honest man or 2 in the time you have been gone. And if they have done to me what I think they mean to do, if you are told I fell, do not believe it. I have walked that bluff in the dark since I was younger than you. I did not fall. Whatever they tell you, your daddy did not fall. Hollis went to the end shelf and found the gray box, a flat steel document box, and opened it, and inside, just as his father had said, were the papers. The forged lien with Eli Tarrant's name signed to a note he had never seen. The signature a fair copy, but not his father's. Hollis could see it even by lantern light. The team made wrong. The survey, 2 of them, the old true one, and the faked one that walked the property line 100 feet over to put the spring and the cellar on Calloway ground. Photographs, gone amber with age, of men and a truck up in the hollow at night, and on the back of one, in Eli's hand, a date, and the words Royce's men, third time this month. And a letter, a real one, on the letterhead of a company Hollis did not know but would learn was a Calloway company, from a man to another man, talking in the careful language such men use about acquiring the Tarrant parcel and resolving the Tarrant problem, a letter that said nothing outright and everything between the lines, the kind of letter that has hanged better men than the ones who wrote it. Hollis stood in the chamber with the box in his hands and understood that his father had left him exactly two things, and that they were not the same thing, and that the second was the one that had cost Eli his life. The gold was the fortune. The box was the reckoning. "We can't tell a soul," Ruth said, very low, behind him. She had read his face. "Mr. Tarrant, if word of this gets to a Calloway, if Bennett so much as smells it, you will not live to see a lawyer. They killed your daddy over the rumor of it. What do you think they'll do over the fact of it?" "I know it," Hollis said. "And we can't leave it here. Not now. Not now that the seal's broke." "I know that too." He looked around the chamber, at the gold, at the weight of it, the simple physical impossibility of it. A 78-year-old man and a 79-year-old woman and a boy could not carry this out of a hole in a mountain in the dark, and they could not protect it, and they could not begin to know what it was worth or what to do with it. Eli had been right about everything except the part where it would be easy once you had it. It was not going to be easy. It had never once in 3 generations been easy. "We need help," Hollis said. "Honest help. Somebody to tell me what this even is, so I know what I'm holding when these people come at me. And somebody from a long way off from Calder County, because my daddy said don't trust the law here, and I believe him. And you've given me no reason to think the law here got honester in 50 years. They closed the mountain back up that night. They could not move it, so they hid it the way it had always been hidden, and Hollis took only a few of the leather-wrapped coins from the felt-lined chest, and one small bar, enough to put in front of an expert and ask, "What is this?" because he had to know. He pivoted the stone wall closed, and reset the lever, and shut the iron door, though he did not seal it again, and he stacked his father's mortared stones back into a rough course over it to hide the keyhole from a casual eye, and the 3 of them went down the dark hill to Ruth's house, and did not sleep much. The trespass came 2 nights later. Hollis had been staying in the cabin, sleeping light, an old man's sleep and a soldier's both, and a little before 3 in the morning Scout. No, there was no Scout, but Ruth's old hound that the boy had left up at the cabin to keep Hollis company set up a low growl from the porch, and Hollis came awake all at once the way he had learned to in another country, and he lay still in the dark and listened. There were men in the yard. 2 of them, maybe 3, moving careful, not talking. He heard a footstep on the path that went up toward the cellar. He heard the spring of the gate. He did not turn on a light. He lay in the dark of his father's house with his heart leaning on its old porch, and he listened to men move around his family's mountain in the night exactly as his father had heard them move 60 years before, and the hair stood up on his arms, and he understood in his body what before he had only understood in Ruth's stories. They were still hunting it. Doyle's smiling offers were the front of it, and this was the back of it, and the 2 had never been separate. In the morning, he found the sign. Boot tracks in the soft ground by the cellar path. The rough course of stone he had stacked over the iron door pulled down and stacked back up, clumsily, by someone who had opened the iron door, looked into the empty cellar, found nothing, and gone away. Just as Amos had built it to happen. The lie had done its work one more time. Whoever Bennett Calloway had sent had stood in the empty room 2 nights running and reported back that there was nothing in the Tarrant cellar but old jars and rope, and somewhere a polished man in his grandfather's chair had felt, Hollis hoped, the first cold finger of doubt, the fear that the thing his family had chased for 100 years might really, after all, not be there. Let him think it, Hollis thought. Let him think there's nothing here. My granddaddy thought of that before either of us was born. It was Ruth who knew how to find the right kind of help, because Ruth, it turned out, had a niece who had married a man in St. Louis who dealt in old furniture and old silver and knew the auction world, and through that thin thread, made over Ruth's kitchen phone with great care and very few details. Hollis got a name. An old man, a numismatist, which Hollis had to be told meant a coin man, semi-retired, with a reputation so clean that even the auction houses spoke of him the way you speak of a judge. His name was Solomon Reinhardt, and he had spent 60 years putting his hands on the rare gold of the world. And when Ruth's niece's husband described, in the most careful general terms, an elderly client in the country who had come into an old family holding of coins and wished a discreet and honest opinion. Solomon Reinhardt agreed to drive down himself, alone, and tell the truth about what he saw, which was the only thing, the man said, that he had ever been any good at. He came on a Thursday in a plain sedan, a small stooped man near 90 with white hair and spotted hands and eyes behind thick glasses that were, Hollis saw at once, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. They did not take him to the mountain. Ruth would not have it, and Hollis agreed. So they met at Ruth's kitchen table, with the curtains drawn, and Hollis set out on a clean dish towel the few things he had brought out of the hill, the leather-wrapped coins from the felt-lined chest, and the one small rough-cast bar, and old Solomon Reinhardt looked at them across the table without touching them for a long moment, the way a man looks at the surface of deep water. Then he took out a loop and a pair of cotton gloves, and he picked up the first coin, and the kitchen went very quiet. He turned it under the light. He breathed on the glass of his loop and wiped it and looked again. He set the coin down with a care that was almost tenderness and picked up the second and the third, and with each one the silence in Ruth Embry's kitchen seemed to thicken until the old man's hands, Hollis noticed, had begun, very slightly, to shake, and it was not age, because they had not shaken when he came in. "Mr. Tarrant," Solomon Reinhardt said at last, and his voice was rough. He did not look up from the coin in his gloved fingers. "Where did these come from?" "My family," Hollis said. "They've been put away a long time." "How many?" The old man did look up now, and behind the thick glasses his eyes were bright and strange. "How many more like these are there? Tell me the truth. I have to know whether I am dreaming." Hollis looked at Ruth, and Ruth looked back at him, and Hollis decided that a man who could not trust Solomon Reinhardt could not trust anybody on this earth, and he said, "There's a roomful." The old numismatist set the coin down very carefully on the dish towel, and he took off his glasses, and he pressed his fingertips to his eyes for a moment. And when he put the glasses back on, he had the look of a man who has been shown something he had given up hoping to see before he died. "You do not understand what you have," he said quietly. "I can see that you do not. So I am going to tell you, and you are going to have to be brave, because it is a great deal to hear." He laid one finger, not quite touching, beside the worn soft coin Hollis had thought of as just the old one, the one that had felt like a thing that mattered. "This piece alone, this one piece, if it is what I believe it is, and I have very seldom in my life been wrong about such a thing, is worth more money than most men make in their lives. By itself, one coin." He moved his finger to the little rough bar. "And this tells me your family was refining its own gold, which means there is more than coins, there is bullion, and bullion at today's prices is its own fortune before we ever count a single rare date." He folded his shaking hands on the table to still them. "Mr. Tarrant, I cannot give you a number until I have seen and cataloged everything, and that will take time, and it must be done in secret, and it must be done right. But you have asked me for an honest opinion, and I have never given any other kind, so here it is. If your roomful is anything like what you have laid on this towel, then you are not the owner of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. You are very likely the owner of a sum that will be counted in the hundreds of millions of dollars." He let that sit in the small, drawn-curtained kitchen, in the silence, with the old hound asleep by the stove and the boy frozen wide-eyed in the doorway. "I have spent 60 years in this trade, and I have never said such a sentence to a living person, and I am 90 years old, and I did not think I would ever get to. So you will forgive an old man if his hands shake." Hollis Tarrant sat very still at the kitchen table and did not say anything at all, because there was nothing to say, and outside, far down Ledford Creek Road, too far yet to hear, a black SUV had turned off the county road and was climbing, slow and quiet and certain, up the hollow toward the home of a man who had come back. The black SUV came up the last of the ruts and stopped in the yard where Doyle's had stopped, but the man who got out of this one did not put on a smile before he knew who he was looking at. He took his time. He stepped down onto the grass in good boots that this time had been bought to look like they had seen mud, and he stood there a moment with his hands on his hips and looked the cabin over the way a man looks over a thing he has already decided is his, the sagging porch and the patched roof and the smoke coming out of the chimney, and only then did he turn to Hollis, who had come out onto the porch with the old hound at his heel, and only then did the smile arrive. "Mr. Tarrant, I'm Bennett Calloway." He came up to the foot of the steps, but not onto them, which Hollis noticed, A small show of manners that was really a show of confidence. A man who did not need to crowd you, because he believed the whole hollow already leaned his way. He was 50 or so, fit and silver and easy in himself, with the kind of open, handsome face that had never in its life been told no by anyone who could afford to be heard. I expect you've heard the name. I've heard it, Hollis said. All the way up the highway. On a bridge, in a bank, in a stretch of road, in a wing of the hospital. Bennett Calloway laughed like that was the finest thing anyone had said to him all week. My family's been here a long time. We try to give back. He looked up at the smoke again. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Tarrant. I almost didn't believe it when they told me a Tarrant had come home. This hollow's been empty my whole life. My grandfather used to point it out to me when I was a boy. The Tarrant place, he'd say, like it was a thing that bothered him. The smile stayed, but the eyes had gone to work. Moving over Hollis, over the porch, over the path that led up the hill behind the house, missing nothing. He never could buy it. It bothered him right up until he died. I imagine a lot of things bothered your grandfather, Hollis said. Something moved behind Bennett Calloway's pleasant face, quick and then gone, like a fish under still water. He set it aside. Mr. Tarrant, I'm not going to insult you with the small talk for very long, because I think you're a serious man, and serious men appreciate getting to it. The little trust that wrote you, the heritage outfit, that's one of mine. Doyle works for me, after a fashion. The number he gave you, 15,000, I'll tell you plain, that was never my number. That was a starting place, and frankly it was beneath both of us, and I've come to apologize for it, and to make you a real offer, man to man, here on your own porch. He paused, and he let the pause do its work, and then he said it. I'll give you $400,000 for the hollow. All of it. Today. And I'll wire it anywhere you want it before the sun goes down. The number sat in the clearing between them. Doyle had jumped from 9,000 to 15 overnight. Bennett had just jumped to 400,000, and Hollis stood on the porch and watched the bidding climb and understood that he was watching fear, that every dollar the Calloways added to the pile was a dollar of doubt, that somewhere a man who had sent other men twice into an empty cellar and gotten back nothing was now afraid, for the first time in 100 years of his family wanting this ground, that he might lose the thing his grandfather could not even buy. That's a lot of money for a falling-down cabin and 160 acres of rock, Hollis said. It's a fair price. 2 days ago your man told me it was a dangerous structure I'd have to pay to tear down. Hollis came to the edge of the porch. It's the same cabin, Mr. Calloway. The roof hasn't gotten any better since Tuesday. So what changed? What do you know on Thursday that you didn't know on Tuesday? Bennett Calloway's smile thinned by a hair. I know that you're a stubborn old man, and I know that stubborn old men cost more. That's all. He spread his hands. The reasonable man, the generous man. Mr. Tarrant, let me speak to you as a friend, because I'd like to be one. You're alone out here. No phone, I'm told. No vehicle to speak of. A bad knee, a bad chest. Winter's coming, and a winter in this hollow will kill a man your age. It's killed younger. You take my offer and you go anywhere you like, and you live like a king for whatever years the Lord's got left for you. Or, and here the warmth thinned a little more, and what was under it began to show, the way the iron had shone under his father's mortar. Or you turn me down, and the county, which I'll remind you is not always a friend to derelict structures, finally condemns this place, and you find yourself an old man with no money and a pile of legal trouble 4 hours from anyone who knows your name. I'd hate that. I truly would. He looked at Hollis steadily. I understand you've got a daughter, Della, and a granddaughter, June, who I'm told has never even met you. A man wants to leave something to his family, doesn't he, Mr. Tarrant? Something better than a fight. $400,000 is something. A condemned cabin and a feud with my family is not. There it was again. The daughter and the granddaughter laid down soft on the table like a hand on the shoulder, the same move Doyle had made. The move these men had clearly been making in this county for 100 years, naming a man's children to him gently, so that he would understand without anyone having to say it that his children were known and findable and part of the arithmetic. And Hollis Tarrant, who had buried a father these men had killed and called crazy, who had spent 55 years running from a truth he was now standing on top of, who had wept in a gold-lit room in the heart of his mountain for everything that had been taken from his blood, looked down at Bennett Calloway from his father's porch and felt something settle in him that was very old and very calm. My granddaughter's name, he said, is the one thing you've gotten right since you drove up. And I'd thank you not to say it again. The clearing was quiet. The hound growled, low, and Hollis put a hand down to it. My answer is no, Mr. Calloway. It was no at 9,000, and it's no at 400,000, and it'll be no at 4 million. And I think you know that. And I think it scares you, and I think it ought to. He came down one step, just one, slow on the bad knee, and Bennett Calloway, for all his ease, took half a step back without seeming to know he had. Your granddaddy wanted this hollow his whole life and couldn't get it, and you've wanted it your whole life because he did, and neither one of you ever once asked yourselves the only question that matters, which is why a poor family would die before they'd sell a piece of rock. You think you know what's here. You don't. But I'll tell you what is here, Mr. Calloway. My grandfather's here, that worked this ground honest while your family robbed every man around him. My father's here, that you people called a madman and put in the ground with 9 mourners and a corner you owned. They're here, and I came home to them. And you cannot buy that, and you cannot condemn it, and you are not going to take it. And if you send your men up my hill in the dark one more time, you had best tell them to come better prepared, because the last Tarrant they pushed too far went quiet to keep his family safe, and I am all done being quiet. Bennett Calloway looked at him for a long moment, and the handsome open face had closed entirely now, and what was behind it was the thing Ruth had told him was always behind it, the old hunger with the manners stripped off, and it was not loud, and it was not cruel in any way a witness could have sworn to, and that was exactly what made it terrible. You're making a mistake, Bennett said quietly. I came up here to be generous. I won't make that mistake twice. He pulled a card from his vest, the way they all did, and he did not hand it over, but set it on the porch rail. You've got until Monday to call me and take the 400,000. After Monday, the offer's gone, and after Monday, this stops being a conversation between gentlemen. He got back into the SUV. Before he closed the door, he looked at Hollis one more time. Your father did fall, Mr. Tarrant. Everybody knows he fell. It would be a shame for an old man with a bad knee, all alone up a dark hollow, to do the same. The door shut, soft and expensive, and the SUV backed down the ruts, and Hollis Tarrant stood on his father's porch in the failing light and watched it go, and he was not afraid, exactly, though a wiser man might have been. He was something colder than afraid. He had just been threatened, in his father's own words, by the grandson of the man who had used those words first, and any last splinter of doubt that the county's story had ever been true went out of him for good. They had killed Eli. This polished man's grandfather had killed Eli, and this polished man had just promised to do the same, in language clean enough to deny. And Hollis understood that the time for breaking mortar with a chisel was over, and the time for something harder had come. He did not have until Monday. He understood that too. Men like Bennett Calloway said Monday, so that you would relax until Sunday night. He went down the hollow to Ruth's that evening, and they sat at her kitchen table again. And Solomon Reinhardt, who had stayed on at a motor court 2 counties over because he could not, he said, bring himself to leave a thing like this half-seen, came and sat with them, and Hollis told them what Bennett had said, all of it. And when he got to the last part, about an old man falling, Ruth Embry went white, and old Solomon took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Then we are out of time to be careful, Ruth said. Mr. Tarrant, you cannot fight these people with a chisel and a shotgun. Your daddy tried that, and your daddy's in the ground. You need a lawyer. Not a lawyer from this county. Every lawyer in this county has Calloway money in his shoes. You need somebody from a long way off who is not afraid of that name because they never had cause to be. It was Solomon Reinhardt, of all of them, who had the name. He had spent 60 years in a trade where provenance was everything, where the question of who truly owned a thing and how they had come by it was the whole game. And over those 60 years he had needed lawyers, good ones, the kind who could prove a chain of title across a century and stand in a courtroom against money and not blink. And there was one, he said, that he trusted above all the rest, a woman who had built her whole practice taking entrenched old families and old companies apart in places where everyone said it could not be done, and who came, as it happened, from this very part of the world, and had her own long quarrel with the men who had run it. Her name was Vivian Cross, and she came down from the capital 3 days later, and she changed everything. She was younger than Hollis had pictured, 50 maybe, with iron gray hair cut short and a way of listening that made you feel the air had gone still, and she sat at Ruth Embry's kitchen table and read the gray box. Every page of it, the forged lien and the 2 surveys and the photographs and the careful damning letter. And she read Amos's letter and Eli's letter, and she did not say a word for the better part of 2 hours. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright and hard. "Mr. Tarrant," she said, "I need to tell you something before we go 1 inch further, because you deserve to know who you've let into your business. My grandfather went into the ground in this county in 1953. The honest ground, I mean, the cemetery, not a mine, though it was a mine that put him there. He worked for the company the Calloways owned, and the company would not pay to ventilate the deep workings, because air costs money and men were cheap, and my grandfather breathed bad air for 19 years, and then he died of it at 46, coughing his lungs out in a company house the company then evicted my grandmother from, because a dead miner's widow is not a paying tenant." She laid her hand flat on the gray box. "I got out of this county on a scholarship, and I swore I would never come back except on my own terms. And for 30 years, the only terms I've ever wanted were these. So when Sol Reinhardt called me and said there was an old man in Calder County who'd come home and crossed the Calloways, I did not ask him about the money. I will tell you honestly that the money is the least interesting thing in this room to me, and there is, I gather, a great deal of money. I asked him one question. I asked him whether the old man would fold. Because I have watched 100 good people fold against that family, take the settlement, sign the paper, go quiet, and I cannot do this with somebody who is going to fold." She looked at him. "Are you going to fold, Mr. Tarrant?" "No, ma'am," Hollis said. "They'll come at your family. You understand that. They've already named your daughter and your granddaughter to you twice. That's not an accident. That's the whole playbook. They make it about the people you love so that fighting starts to feel like the selfish thing." "I understand it." Hollis thought about Della on the phone. "You don't ever hear yourself," and about a girl named June who had asked if her grandfather was alive. "My daddy understood it too, and he chose to leave me right instead of safe, and I've come around to thinking he was correct. I'd rather hand my granddaughter a true name than a quiet one." Vivian Cross looked at him a moment longer, and then, for the first time since she had walked in, she almost smiled. "All right," she said. "Then here is what we are going to do, and we are going to do it fast, because their Monday is a lie and you know it, and so do I." She began to lay it out, crisp and certain, and Hollis listened the way he had listened to officers he trusted in another country, which is to say closely and without interrupting. They would not go to the county with any of it. The county was rotten and had been for 100 years, and walking into that courthouse with this evidence would be walking it straight to the Calloways. They would go over the county's head, all the way over it, to the state. Vivian had spent 30 years building the kind of relationships that let her pick up a telephone and reach an investigator in the state attorney general's office who would take her call and take her seriously, and she would put the forged lien and the faked survey in front of people whose paychecks did not come from anywhere near Calder County. They would bring in the state police, not the local sheriff, to look at the matter of Eli Tarrant's death, which she believed, on the strength of that letter, could and should be reopened. And they would secure the gold, every ounce of it, under documentation and guard, with its provenance established beyond any question by Amos's own letter and the mining history and Solomon Reinhardt's expert authentication, so that no Calloway and no court and no lawyer could ever stand up and claim that an old man had stolen it or dreamed it. "The provenance is the whole thing," Vivian said. "It's what your father understood, and it's what saved you. He didn't just leave you treasure. He left you the story of the treasure, written down, signed, dated, by the men who made it. Most people who come into something like this can't prove where it came from, and that's where the vultures get them. You can prove every link of it back to a man breaking rock by hand in 1920. That makes it yours, unassailably yours." She closed the gray box. "And then, Mr. Tarrant, once the gold is safe and the state is moving, we do the one thing the Calloways have never once allowed to happen in the whole history of this county. We make it public. We put your father's story, with the documents, with the proof, in front of a newspaper big enough that the Calloways can't buy it, and we let the whole world see what they did. Sunlight, Mr. Tarrant. These people have lived in the dark for 100 years. The only thing they have ever truly been afraid of is the light. They moved fast. They had to. The Calloways moved faster than even Vivian expected, which only proved her right that Monday had been a lie. It was the Saturday night, 2 days before Bennett's deadline, that they came. Hollis had not been sleeping at the cabin those last nights, on Vivian's instruction, but the cabin was not empty, because Vivian Cross, who had fought this family in spirit her whole life and meant to win, had made certain that anyone who came up Tarrant Hollow in the dark would not find an old man alone. She had spent a day on the telephone, and she had put the matter of an imminent threat to a piece of property under active investigation by the state in front of the right people in the right language. And so when Doyle and three men Hollis did not know came up the hollow a little after 2 in the morning, with a cutting torch and pry bars and the clear intention of getting into a cellar and taking out whatever they could find or destroying whatever they could not, there were 2 unmarked cars of the state police already sitting dark in the trees below the spring, where they had been sitting since dusk, watching. The men got as far as the cellar door. They got the rough stone course pulled down and the iron door open and stood once more, the 3rd time in 2 weeks, in the empty room, in Amos Tarrant's lie, and one of them was running the torch along the back wall, having been told this time, plainly, that the wall was wrong and to cut through it. When the lights came on and the state police came up out of the dark, and it was over very quickly and without a shot, which is the way these things go when one side has prepared and the other has only ever needed to threaten. Bennett Calloway, of course, was nowhere near the hollow. He was at home, asleep or pretending to be, with clean hands, the way the men of his family had always kept clean hands. But Doyle was caught with a cutting torch at the door of a property under state investigation, in the company of 3 hired men, one of whom, it would turn out, had a record and a loose tongue and very little loyalty to a man who paid him in cash to do felonies in the dark. And the question of who had sent them, and on whose instruction, and going back how far, became, in the hands of investigators who owed Calder County nothing, a thread, and Vivian Cross had been pulling threads on powerful families her whole life, and she knew exactly how to pull this one. The light came after that, and it came like a flood after a long dry spell, all at once, carrying everything before it. The newspaper in the city, the one too big for the Calloways to own, ran the story across the top of its front page, and it was the kind of story that does not stay in one newspaper. An honest old miner who hid a fortune from a company that robbed its men. A son who died trying to prove the truth and was called mad for it, and very likely murdered for it. A coroner long dead who had signed a lie. A grandson of the original man still running the county from his grandfather's chair, still trying, 100 years on, to take the same hollow by the same means, caught at last with hired men and a cutting torch at the door of a dead man's secret. And at the center of it, an old veteran who had come home with $11 and a bad knee to a cabin everyone told him to sell, and who had refused, and who had been right, the way his father had been right, the way nobody in Calder County had been brave enough to say his father was right for 55 years. The state attorney general opened a formal investigation into 100 years of Calloway land dealings, and once the door was open, others came through it. That was the part that moved Hollis most, in the weeks after, more than the gold, and almost more than the clearing of his father's name. Other people came forward, old people, mostly, and the children of old people, with stories they had carried as long as Ruth Embry had carried hers, of land taken by a lien nobody remembered signing, of a survey that moved in the night, of a farm lost to a foreclosure that came down a week too fast, of a grandfather who had complained to the wrong man and lost everything. There was an old fellow named Walt Renfro who came up the hollow on a cane to shake Hollis's hand and tell him that the Calloways had taken his daddy's bottomland in 1958 with a piece of paper his daddy swore to his dying day was forged, and that nobody had ever believed him, and that Walt Renfro had lived 70 years thinking his own father might have been a liar, until he opened the newspaper. He stood in the yard and cried, an old man crying over a thing 70 years gone, and Hollis held on to his hand and understood that his father had been right about that too, that the gold was the fortune, but the showing of it was the thing that mattered, because the showing of it had broken something open that had been sealed in this county longer than any cellar. Solomon Reinhardt finished his catalog in a vault in the city, under guard, over many days, with Vivian's people documenting every step so that no question could ever be raised. And when it was done, he came to tell Hollis the number himself, because he said a man ought to hear such a number from someone who understood what it meant and not from a piece of paper. They sat in Ruth Embry's front room, the 2 old men, and Solomon Reinhardt held his catalog pages in his spotted hands and did not look at them, because he had the number by heart. "I told you, that first day, hundreds of millions," he said. "I was hedging a little, because I am a careful man and I did not want to raise you up and let you down. I will not hedge now." He took a breath. "The bullion alone, the bars your grandfather poured and the ones your family bought over the years, comes to a little over $30 million at today's price of gold. That by itself would make you a wealthy man, and we could stop there and you would never have to worry again, you or your daughter or your granddaughter or her children. But we do not stop there." His eyes brightened behind the thick glasses. "The common coins, the ordinary dates, the double eagles and the eagles by the sackful, that is another 40 million, perhaps a little more, because gold is gold and there is a great deal of it. So before we have looked at a single rare thing, Mr. Tarrant, before we have opened the felt-lined chest, you are worth better than $70 million. He paused. "And then there is the felt-lined chest." Hollis waited. The fire ticked in the stove. "Your grandfather, or perhaps your father, I cannot say which, had an eye. They set certain coins apart, and they were right too, though I do not think they knew the half of how right. There are pieces in that chest, Mr. Tarrant, that I have only ever seen in the great collections and the auction records, pieces that the wealthiest men in the world bid against each other to own, single coins that have sold for sums you would not believe if I told you them about one coin. There are several such pieces in your family's chest. Several." His voice had gone quiet with the old reverence Hollis had seen the first day, together with the bearer bonds, some of which are redeemable and some of which are themselves now collectors' pieces worth more than their face. The full and careful valuation of everything your family hid in that mountain, conservatively, and I am being conservative, Mr. Tarrant, because I do not exaggerate, comes to $470 million. $470 million. The number went into the small warm room and did not seem to belong there. In a house with a chipped coffee cup and a quilt pieced by somebody's dead mother and an old hound asleep by the stove. Hollis sat with it. He did not whoop or weep or laugh. He had done his weeping in the mountain, on his grandfather's bench, and what he felt now was something quieter and stranger, a kind of vast tiredness and a kind of peace, the feeling of a man who has carried something very heavy a very long way and has finally been allowed to set it down. $470 million, he said, just to hear it in his own voice. Yes, for a falling-down cabin nobody wanted. Hollis shook his head slowly. "My daddy died with 9 mourners. My grandfather broke rock by hand in the dark for 11 years and told nobody. And it comes to $470 million. He looked at the old numismatist. It was never about the money, was it? Not for them and not for us. They wanted it because we wouldn't give it. We kept it because they wanted it. And the whole time it was just sitting in the hill, being worth more than the whole county, and not feeding a single Tarrant for 100 years. No, Solomon Reinhardt agreed gently. Gold in a hole feeds no one. It is only worth something when it comes up into the light. Like most things, I have found, in a long life. The Calloways came apart over the following year the way such things come apart, slowly and then all at once. Doyle, caught at the door with the torch, turned on the man above him when the choice was that or take it all himself, and the man above him turned on the one above him, and the thread Vivian Cross had pulled ran all the way up, as she had known it would, to the chair Bennett Calloway sat in the house his grandfather built, with his grandfather's appetite. The forged lien and the faked survey, once the state's own document examiners had looked at them, were exposed for exactly what Eli Tarrant had said they were, 55 years too late for Eli, but not, it turned out, too late to matter. The investigation into the old land dealings widened and widened. The bank came under examination. The development empire, built on 100 years of land taken in the dark, began to be unbuilt in the light, parcel by parcel, as old wrongs were dragged out and looked at and, in more than a few cases, made right, the Renfro bottomland among them. And the matter of how Eli Tarrant came to go off a bluff he could have walked blind, reopened by the state police on the strength of a dead man's letter and a living man's refusal to fold, did not bring anyone to a courtroom in the end, because the men who would have answered for it were themselves long dead. But it brought the truth onto the record. The county, which had written down for 55 years that Eli Tarrant fell, wrote down at last that the matter was reopened, that the original finding was unsound, that Eli Tarrant had spent the last years of his life trying to report a crime and had been discredited by men with a reason to discredit him. It was not a conviction, but it was the truth set down in the county's own hand, where his father's name had been a shame, and Hollis Tarrant drove 4 hours to read it off the screen at the courthouse himself, and then drove 4 hours back. And that was the only thing he did with a whole day, and it was enough. The town that had called his father crazy had to look at him now, and it did not know how. Donna, the county worker with the kind, tired face and the clipboard, wrote him a letter, an honest one, that said she was glad she had been wrong, that she thought about him often, that the bed at Calder Manor would always be there, but she did not expect he would need it. And Hollis wrote her back and told her she had only ever been kind to a man everyone else had written off, and that he held nothing against her, and that he hoped she would keep being kind to the next old man with a duffel and no money, because the next one might be right too, and nobody would know it. He did not gloat. There was no satisfaction in it for him. The seeing of the mockers proven wrong, none of the thing he might have imagined in 55 years of bitterness. They had been small people doing what small people do, believing the loud story over the quiet one, and he had been one of them himself for half a century, believing the county's Eli over his own. He could not stand in judgment over people for a sin he had committed worse than any of them. What he did instead, with the money, told the county more about Hollis Tarrant than any speech could have. He did not move away and live like a king, as Bennett had promised he could. He stayed in the hollow. He had the cabin restored, carefully, by his own hand where his hands still served, and by good local men where they did not. The men paid honestly and on time, which was itself a kind of news in a county where one family had set the wages for 100 years. He kept it a cabin. He put a good roof on it and good windows and a furnace so the winter would not kill him. And he left the hand-hewn sills his great-grandfather had squared exactly where they were, because some things you do not improve. And he remembered what Amos had written, in copperplate by a mine lamp in 1931. Use it better than I had the chance to. So Hollis Tarrant, who had spent his whole life with nothing and had learned exactly what nothing does to a person, set up a fund, a real one. With real lawyers Vivian found him, and he put a great deal of money into it, and its purpose was the plainest thing in the world. It was for the people the Calloways had cheated and the children of the people the Calloways had cheated, for the widows evicted from company houses and the families who lost their bottomland to paper they never signed. And it was for the county's poor more broadly, the old men with duffels and no money, the people the loud story had always rolled over. He did not put his name on it. There was no Tarrant Bridge, no Tarrant Wing. He had seen what it does to a family to make its name into the name of a place, to sit on top of a county like a hawk on a post, and he wanted no part of it. The fund was named for his father, the Eli Tarrant Fund, so that the name that had been a shame in Calder County for 55 years would now, for as long as the money lasted, which the lawyers said would be a very long time, be the name on the help that came when help came. But money, for all of it, did not give Hollis back the years, and he knew that, and he never once pretended otherwise. It did not undo Ada's long dying or the silence he had let grow between himself and Della until it set like concrete. It did not make his knee stop grinding or the tenant in his chest pay up and leave. He was 78, then 79, an old man who had come into a fortune too late to spend any of it on the life he might have had. And there were nights in the restored cabin, with the furnace humming where the iron range had been, when he sat alone and felt the full weight of how much had been lost and how little of it gold could buy back. And on those nights he understood his father better than he ever had, understood why a man who had this in his own mountain had still died with 9 mourners and a ruined name, because the gold had never been the point and it had never been the thing he was poor in. The thing he was poor in came up the hollow on a cold, bright Saturday in the late fall, in a car Hollis did not know. And he came out onto the porch the way he had come out for Doyle and for Bennett Calloway, the old hound at his heel, not knowing who it was. And the car stopped in the yard, and the driver's door opened, and his daughter got out. Della stood by the car a moment, looking at the cabin, at the smoke from the chimney, at the old man on the porch, and Hollis could see even from there that she had her mother in her, the same flat, careful way of holding herself when she was frightened and would not show it. And he could see that she did not know what to say, that she had driven 4 hours not knowing what she would say, the way he had once driven 4 hours the other direction not knowing. And then the passenger door opened, and a girl got out. She was 13, tall and coltish, with a serious face and dark hair, and Hollis saw with a catch in his old leaning heart, with his own jaw, with Eli's jaw, the very jaw Ruth Embry had wept over on his first night home. June. She stood by the car and looked up at the grandfather she had been told, at Christmas, her mother was not sure was still alive, and she did not run to him, and she did not hang back. She just looked, the frank, open, serious look of a child taking the measure of a true thing, and Hollis understood that she had her great-great-grandfather's eyes, the eyes that could see how a thing was put together, the eyes you needed to look past the empty room to the truth, and that the family had not, after all, been erased. "Dad?" Della said from the yard. Her voice was not the wall it had been on the phone. It was something cracked open. "I read it. I read all of it. The newspaper. The whole. About Granddad. About what they—" She stopped. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth exactly the way Ruth Embry had, and Hollis thought, "We are all of us holding the same lantern, all the way down. You weren't crazy. He wasn't crazy. And I told you. On the phone I told you that you never hear yourself, and you were." She could not finish it. "It's all right," Hollis said. "It's not." Della came forward a few steps. "I doubted you. My whole life I was raised to think that place ruined this family, and I never once asked who ruined it. I said terrible things to you. June asked if you were alive, and I said I wasn't sure, and that was a choice, Dad. That was a thing I did. I let it get that far." The tears were coming now, and she was not fighting them. "And the whole time you were up here alone being right. Like him. Just like him." Della. Hollis came down off the porch, slow, on the bad knee, holding the rail, and he came across the yard to his daughter, and he was an old man, and she was middle-aged, and there were 30 years of silence standing between them in the cold, bright air. "I left you a worse thing than you ever did to me," he said. "I left you ashamed for a granddaddy and a stranger for a father, and I did it out of my own pride, because I had nothing and I could not stand for you to see me have nothing, and that is a poorer reason than anything you ever did. Your granddaddy left me right instead of safe. I left you safe instead of loved, and I have known it for 30 years and been too proud to fix it. So we are even, you and me. We are even on doing wrong out of fear, which is the only kind of even that ever matters in a family." He put out his arms. It cost him something to do it. He had not done it easily in a very long time. "Come here, daughter. We've wasted enough." And she came, and Hollis Tarrant held his daughter in the yard of his father's house for the first time in 3 decades, and over her shoulder he watched his granddaughter watching them, that serious face working, and he held out one arm to her too. And June came across the yard and into it, and the 3 of them stood there, and the old hound circled them once and lay down, and the smoke went up off the chimney into a hard blue sky, and somewhere up the hill the sealed mountain held its last few secrets, the ones the family would keep, the bench where Amos had worked and the steps Eli had sat on, the empty room and the true room, and it was no longer keeping them against anyone. It was just holding them, the way a mountain holds a thing, patient and certain, for whoever came home to look with the right eyes. Later, when Della had gone in to put coffee on and Ruth had come up with Asa and a basket as she always did, Hollis took June up the hill. Just the 2 of them, the old man and the girl, slow on the path so his knee could manage it, and he showed her the cellar, the iron door and the empty room, and, when he had worked the lever and pivoted the stone, the dark steps going down into the heart of the mountain, where her people had hidden what was theirs from the men who meant to take it. He did not take her all the way down. The gold was gone from it now, safe in the city, and there was nothing down there anymore but worked stone and old oak and the marks of a single jack on the walls. But he stood with her at the top of the steps with the cold, dry air coming up, and he told her about Amos, who broke this rock by hand, and about Eli, who sealed it and died for it, and was right. And he gave her the iron key, the heavy worn key that Ruth Embry had kept in her Bible for 50 years waiting for somebody to come home. "It's not for the lock anymore," Hollis told his granddaughter. "We don't need it for the lock. It's just for keeping. So you remember." He closed her young fingers around it the way his own had been closed around it on his first night home. "There's people in this world, June, that'll tell you you're chasing nothing, that a thing's not worth fighting for, or it's not really there, or you ought to take the money and go quiet. Your great-great-granddaddy heard it. Your great-granddaddy heard it. I heard it from a county lady with a clipboard and a man in a black truck, and they were kind, some of them, and they were even smart, and they were wrong. There was something here. There was always something here. It just took somebody willing to keep looking after everybody told them there was nothing. He looked down the dark steps, then up at the girl with Eli's jaw and Amos's eyes. You came from people who kept looking. Don't you ever let anybody talk you out of that. June held the key, and she looked down into the dark a long moment with those serious old eyes, and then she looked up at her grandfather. Is that why you came back? She asked. After all that time? Because you finally believed there was something here? Hollis Tarrant thought about it, the way he thought about most things, slow and honest, and he found that the true answer surprised him a little, even after everything. No, he said at last. I came back with $11 and a bad knee because there was a place that was still mine after everything else was gone, and I was too old and too tired to keep running off from it. He put his hand on her shoulder, light, the way his father's letter had finally reached out across 55 years to put a hand on him. The gold was a thing my daddy left me. But you want to know what I actually came home for? June, it's standing right here holding the key. I just didn't know it yet. A man almost never does. He turned them both back toward the path, toward the cabin and the smoke and the coffee and Della and Ruth and the boy, toward the warm lit windows of a house that had stood through 55 years of nobody and was full of somebody again. Come on, Hollis said. Your mother's got the coffee on, and it's cold, and we've all of us been out in the dark long enough. And they went down the hill together, the old man and the girl, and the mountain stood behind them the way it had always stood, holding its few last quiet things, and below them in the hollow the lights of the cabin were on, and the smoke went up, and the creek ran on the way it had run when the first Tarrant set the first log, and a family that the world had very nearly erased walked home in the last of the good cold light, and was not erased, and would not be, not ever again. The first hard snow came to Tarrant Hollow a week before Christmas, and for the first Christmas in 55 years there was light in the windows, and the smell of a goose in the oven, and the sound of more than one voice in the rooms. Della had come for the week and brought June, and they had brought a tree, a little cedar cut off the slope above the spring, and June had strung it with popcorn, and with paper stars she cut at the kitchen table while the snow came down soft and steady outside. Hollis sat in his father's house and watched his granddaughter make paper stars, and he thought, without bitterness now, that 1 year ago this same girl had asked her mother whether her grandfather was even alive, and that her mother had not been sure how to answer, and that the distance between that question and this kitchen was a distance no map could measure and no amount of gold could have bought, and had cost, in the end, only the one thing he had been too proud to spend for 30 years, which was the willingness to be seen with nothing in his hands. The Calloway matter finished itself over that winter, the way a long fever finally breaks. There was no grand reckoning for the oldest of it, and Hollis had made his peace with that. The men who had forged the lien and faked the survey and signed a false word over his father's death were all of them dead, beyond the reach of any court. And you cannot try a dead man, however much he deserves it. But Bennett Calloway was not dead, and Bennett Calloway had sent 4 men up a hill in the dark with a cutting torch, and that was a thing the living could answer for. Doyle, once he understood that loyalty was a luxury he could no longer afford, gave the state everything, the instructions and the cash and the careful arrangements by which a respectable man kept his hands clean, and in the spring Bennett Calloway stood in a courtroom 2 counties away, in front of a judge who had never in his life owed the Calloways a thing, and pleaded to the charges that came out of that night. And the polish did not save him there. He did not go away forever. Men like that seldom do. But he went away. And more than the going away, the thing that broke the family's 100-year hold on Calder County was the slow public unbuilding of everything they had built in the dark. The Attorney General's people went through the old land dealings parcel by parcel, and the bank came under the examiner's eye, and one by one the wrongs were dragged up into the light and looked at, and where they could be made right, they were made right. The county took the name off the highway that summer, by a vote of its own commissioners, who found all at once a courage they had misplaced for a century. Hollis did not go to watch them do it. He took no pleasure in the pulling down of a name, having learned too well what the building up of one costs the people underneath it. What did give him pleasure, the quiet, deep kind that an old man learns to recognize as the only kind worth having, was the fund. He had not put his name on it, and he did not go to the ceremonies. And most of the people it helped never knew that the help had come down a gravel road from a man in a restored cabin at the head of a hollow. But he heard about them, because Vivian Cross made sure he heard, sending him word now and again of where the money had gone, and each piece of word was a small light. There was a clinic in the county seat that had been closing for want of funds. That did not close. There was a girl named Wren Castle, the great-granddaughter of a man the Calloway Bank had ruined in 1949, the first person in 4 generations of her family to finish high school, who that fall went off to the state university with every dollar of it paid, and who wrote a letter to the fund that Vivian forwarded, a letter from an 18-year-old girl who did not know whose money it was, that said she was going to study the law, of all the things in the world, because she had read in the newspaper about a family that got cheated and a lawyer who fought for them, and she wanted to be the kind of person who fought for the people nobody believed. Hollis read that letter 3 times, and then he sat for a long while looking out at the hollow, and he thought about Amos breaking rock in the dark so that someday somebody he would never meet could be lifted up into the light, and he understood, finally, and all the way down, what his grandfather had meant. Gold in a hole feeds no one. It was only worth something when it came up. In April, when the redbud came out along Ledford Creek and the dogwood after it, Hollis did the thing he had been carrying since the day he stood at the courthouse and read the words that reopened his father's death. He had a stone set. Eli Tarrant had gone into the ground at the Little Sable Hollow Church in the spring of 1971 with 9 mourners and a marker, so plain it was almost an insult, a small flat county stone with a name and 2 dates and nothing else, because there had been no money and no one willing to spend it, and a feeling in the county, never said but everywhere, that a man who died in disgrace did not warrant much. Hollis had a new stone cut, good granite, and he wrote the words on it himself, sitting at the kitchen table for the better part of an evening getting them right. And what he had carved was the name and the dates, and under them a line he took from his father's own letter, the line that had reached across 55 years and found him. He was right, and he was not believed, and now he is. And under that, the only judgment Hollis would allow himself on the whole long sorry business. A good man, told the truth, alone. They held a service for it on a Sunday in late April, and this time the little church was full. That was the thing that undid Hollis, more than the stone, more than the words. The church that had held 9 mourners for Eli Tarrant could not hold all the people who came to see his name set right. They came from all over the county, the old ones who remembered and the young ones who had read the papers, the Renfros and the Castles, and 100 families who had carried their own version of the same wound. And they stood out in the churchyard in the spring sun when the pews ran out. And Hollis stood at his father's grave with Ruth Embry on one side of him and Della and June on the other. And when the preacher asked if anyone wished to say a word, Hollis found he could not, and it was Ruth, who stepped forward, small and bent and fierce, and said the only thing that needed saying. I held the lantern the night this man buried his secret, Ruth Embry said to the crowded churchyard, in a voice that did not shake though her hands did. And I held my tongue for 55 years after, because I was afraid, like the whole rest of you were afraid, and our being afraid did not save him one single day. So I will not hold my tongue now. Eli Tarrant told the truth in a county that did not want to hear it, and it killed him, and every one of us let it. The least we can do, the very least, is to stand here in the daylight and say his name out loud and mean it. And she turned to the new stone and she said, Eli, just the once, the way you say a name to someone who can finally hear it, and the whole churchyard, 200 people and more, said it back, and the sound of it went up off that hillside the way the smoke went up off the cabin. And Hollis Tarrant stood at his father's grave and let it wash over him. 55 years too late, and exactly on time. He did not forget what was owed to Ruth, either. She would not take money, not directly. She was too proud, the same hard-headed mountain pride Hollis knew from the inside. And when he tried to give her some outright, she got ornery and told him she had not held a lantern twice in one life for pay. So he did it the way you do a thing for someone who will not let you do it. He put her snug small house right, top to bottom, a new roof and a new furnace and a well that did not run dry in August, and he told her it was only neighborly, and she let him pretend that was true. And for the boy Asa, who had found the draft at the bottom of the wall when 2 grown people had missed it, who had the eyes the same as June had the eyes, Hollis set up a thing through Vivian's lawyers that Ruth could not refuse on the boy's behalf. Money put away that would carry Asa anywhere he was smart enough to go, which Ruth allowed, because a great-grandmother will accept for a child what she will never accept for herself. The two children, June and Asa, took to each other that first summer the way children do, and they ran the hollow together, fishing the pool below the spring and climbing the slope above it. And more than once Hollis watched them go up the path toward the cellar and felt no fear at all, only a kind of rightness, the next pair of Tarrant eyes and the eyes that had helped them, growing up together on the mountain that had kept the family alive. For June came back. That was the gift the last years held, the one Hollis had not dared to hope for and would not have traded for all $470 million. Della and June had been 4 hours of stranger when they drove up that cold, bright Saturday, and they did not become close all at once, because nothing real does, but they came back, again and again, weekends and then weeks, and June asked to spend the whole of that first summer in the hollow, and Della, who had her own healing to do with her father and was doing it, let her. So Hollis had a summer of his granddaughter. He taught her what his hands still remembered, how to read a board and drive a nail true and tell good wood from bad, the carpenter's knowledge his own father and grandfather had carried, and she took to it with the same grave attention she gave to everything, the attention of a child who has decided a thing is worth learning. He told her the old stories, all of them, Amos in the dark of the company's mine and the high-grade pocket on the family ground, the 11 years of secret work, the forge back in the hill, and Eli's 3 years of writing letters no one answered. He gave her the whole of it, because he understood now what his father had understood, that a family that is told its true story cannot be erased, and that the telling was the most important thing he had left to do. He was getting old. He did not pretend otherwise, to himself or to her. The knee was worse, and the tenant in his chest was bolder, and there were mornings the path up the hill was more than he could manage, and he sat on the porch instead and let the children carry his stories up the mountain for him. He had come home with $11 at 78, and the fortune had come too late to buy back a single one of the lost years, and he had made his peace with that long since. What it had bought was not time. It was the chance to spend the little time he had left on the right things, which is all that money has ever really been good for, and more than most people get. On an evening near the end of that first summer, with the light going long and gold the way it had gone the day he first drove up the hollow, Hollis sat on the porch and watched June come down the hill alone. She had been up at the cellar by herself, which he allowed her now, and she came down the path slow and thoughtful, and she had the iron key in her hand, the heavy worn key he had given her, that Ruth had kept 50 years in her Bible, that had opened a lock his grandfather made and his father hid. She came up onto the porch and sat down beside her grandfather, and for a while neither of them said anything, the way the two of them had learned they could sit, and the creek ran on down in the dark of the hollow the way it had run for 100 years. "Grandpa," June said finally, "when you're gone." The hollow. She did not look at him. She looked out at the mountain, those serious old eyes on the dark slope where her people were buried and her people's secrets were kept. "It comes to me, doesn't it? Someday." "It does," Hollis said. "If you want it. Nobody'll make you take it. Your great-granddaddy left it to me knowing I might not come, and I didn't, for 55 years. You get to choose, same as I did." June was quiet, turning the old key over in her young hands. "I'm going to keep it," she said. Not a question this time, the way it had not been a question when Hollis told a smiling man on this same porch that his answer was no. All of it. The cabin and the mountain and the cellar and the key. And the stories. "I'm going to keep the stories most of all, and tell them to mine, the way you told them to me." She looked at her grandfather then, and there was Eli's jaw and Amos's eyes and something else in her too, something that was only June. So nobody ever gets to say there was nothing here. Hollis Tarrant looked at his granddaughter in the long gold light, and he felt the whole of it settle into place, the 100 years and the 3 generations and the gold in the hill, and the name set right in stone, and the family that had very nearly been erased and was not, all of it coming down at last to a 13-year-old girl on a porch with an iron key in her hand and her mind made up, and he understood that he could go, when his time came, the way his father had not been allowed to go, in peace, knowing the truth was kept and the mountain was held and the looking would go on. "No," he agreed, and he put his old hand over her young one, over the key. "Nobody ever gets to say that again." And they sat together on the porch as the light failed and the first stars came out over the hollow, the old man and the girl, and behind them the mountain stood the way it had always stood, patient and certain, holding its quiet things for the ones who would come home to look with the right eyes, for as long as there were Tarrants to come home, which now, at last, there would be. Stories like this remind us that starting over is terrifying, but it is always possible. If you or someone you love is facing a total reset right now, whether from a divorce, a loss, or a financial disaster, you need a plan. Scan the QR code on your screen or click the link below to get the Phoenix Blueprint for just $17. It gives you the exact steps you need to take in the first 48 hours and a 90-day plan to get your independence back. Thank you for watching.